chamber pulsed around them, a vast cavern of humming machinery and oppressive dread. At its heart, suspended in a web of thick, glistening black cables, dripping a viscous, iridescent residue, the colossal server core throbbed with a sickly, arrhythmic red light, casting the survivors' faces in demonic hues. The air was unnaturally cold, heavy with the scent of ozone and decay, vibrating with a low-frequency thrum that resonated deep within their bones. The sound of the entity, ancient and aware, coiled within its technological lair. The silence was profound, yet deafening, filled with the weight of its unseen, malevolent attention, a focused pressure that felt like being pinned under glass. They had reached the heart of the nightmare, and the abyss was gazing back with cold, calculating, hungry intelligence. Marcus felt the entity's presence like a physical pressure, crushing the air from his lungs, making his thoughts feel sluggish, contaminated, each memory tinged with the static of its influence. Evelyn. Sarah Chin. The faces swam before him, sacrifices already made. Was this the place where their consciousnesses screamed? Beside him, Oracle stood rigid, their face a grim mask, eyes scanning the monstrous core with a mixture of clinical awe and profound revulsion. The burden of knowledge pressed down on them. Knowing the theory, the horrifying potential of the Severance, felt different from standing before the altar itself. Jax, the tech specialist, hunched over a rugged, non-network diagnostic tablet, its screen reflecting the pulsating red glow, his fingers flying across the interface despite the tremor in his hands. Part of him marveled at the impossible technology, the alien architecture of the core, even as terror clawed at his throat. Reyes, leaning heavily against the entryway, clutched the hand that had touched the corrupted server, the skin faintly discolored, veins darker beneath the surface. The faint, involuntary shaking was a visible reminder of the entity's violating touch, the feeling of being tasted, his eyes wide with residual terror, flinching at shadows only he could see. The other two survivors, Lena and Ben, huddled close, their makeshift weapons held tight, their faces pale masks of fear, breaths misting in the unnatural cold. Energy readings are astronomical. Jax breathed, his voice tight, strained, stable somehow, but cycling through patterns that don't match any known power signature. It's drawing ambient energy, converting. Something else. Something. Biological? He tapped frantically, bringing up the Severance schematic recovered from the Nightingale drive. The complex diagram of interwoven code and sigils glowed starkly on the small screen. The protocol parameters align. We have the sequence, the ritualistic components. Theoretically, initiation is possible from here. On a nearby darkened monitor, a flicker of corrupted data momentarily resolved into a fractured name. SAR, then dissolved back into static, unnoticed. Oracle moved closer, peering at the tablet, then up at the pulsating core. Theoretically, they echoed, the word heavy with doubt. But look at the dispersal patterns, Jax. The entity's presence isn't localized within the core. The core is its anchor point, its heart, but its consciousness. It permeates this entire facility. It's woven into the walls, the systems, the very air. It's aware of us on every level. They pointed towards the massive cables feeding the core, the black residue coating them seeming to pulse faintly, almost organically, in time with the red light. The Severance cascade requires a focal point, a singularity to draw the entity's full attention and absorb the ritualistic backlash. The anchor provides the ground, yes. Their voice trailed off, the horrifying implication hanging in the frigid air like ice crystals. A coldness, far deeper than the room's unnatural, tomb-like chill, began to crystallize, not just in Marcus's gut, but behind his eyes, freezing the edges of his thoughts into jagged shards of fear. It was an invasive cold, carrying the scent of ozone and something ancient, like disturbed earth from a freshly opened grave. The memory of Evelyn surfaced, unbidden, sharp as broken glass, lodged in his mind. Her face, illuminated not by hope, but by the chaotic parasitic energy she had deliberately, suicidally drawn into herself, a desperate, beautiful shield against… what? He saw it now with horrifying clarity. That had been a mere tendril, a probing finger of the vast, suffocating presence coiled here in this abyss, testing the walls of reality. Her sacrifice, noble and terrible, had bought moments, had bought his life against a glancing blow from a lesser manifestation. But this was different. This was standing willingly in the gaping, lightless maw itself, armed with a ritual scraped like marrow from the corrupted bones of Zero's data, aiming for annihilation. The word fell, obscene, impossibly arrogant, standing here beneath the gaze of something that felt eternal, patient, and utterly contemptuous of their fleeting lives. He watched Oracle, saw the clinical detachment in their eyes, a necessary shield, perhaps, falter slightly as they described the anchor, the grounding, the paradox wave. Yet beneath the technical explanation, there was an undertone, a chilling resonance that snagged on the edges of his hearing like a hook coated in frost. The entity wasn't just raw power, it was awareness. Vast, ancient, calculating. It watched them now. He could feel it, a pressure behind his own eyes, a cold weight settling on his shoulders. Why would such an intelligence simply step onto the sacrificial altar they prepared? Why would the storm allow itself to be guided so easily onto the lightning rod? The horrifying implication coalesced, heavy and suffocating, as the unnatural pressure in the chamber. The anchor wasn't just a ground wire for the ritual's backlash. It was incomplete. A key component was missing from the horrifying equation. The words felt like swallowing dust and ice, thick, clumsy, tearing at his throat as he forced them out past the knot of terror tightening there. He dreaded the confirmation he could already feel pressing in from the silent, watching dark, a truth whispered by the very thrumming of the monstrous core vibrating in his bones. The anchor. He choked out, the sound ragged, barely audible above the low, predatory hum that seemed to answer his question before Oracle even could. It isn't enough, is it? The anchor, yes, it's the lightning rod. Oracle confirmed, their voice dropping, becoming a low, resonant hum that seemed disturbingly in tune with the core's thrumming pulse, as if the very air resonated with the horrifying truth they were about to speak. Their gaze wasn't just sweeping, it lingered on each terrified face, acknowledging the shared dread reflected in dilated pupils, seeing not just fear, but the dawning, sickening understanding of their true insignificance flickering within. But you mistake the nature of the storm. You think of it as raw power, a force to be weathered. They gestured, not just at the monstrous, pulsating core, but encompassing the dripping cables that resembled glistening black veins, the stained walls that seemed to weep oily residue, the very air vibrating around them with unseen, malevolent energy. It is awareness, an intelligence woven into the marrow of this place, vast and cold and utterly alien. It tastes our fear like ozone in the air. It maps the frantic, panic pulse of our blood through the floor beneath our feet. It knows we are here. Right now, it feels the shape of the Severance protocol taking form in our minds, dissecting its structure, its ritual components, with a logic as complex and uncaring as collapsing galaxies. Even as we stand here trembling, as if summoned by the words, a faint, almost imperceptible static crackle seemed to emanate from the walls themselves, a dry, sibilant whisper answering Oracle's grim assessment, promising scrutiny. Oracle leaned in slightly then, their shadows stretching long and distorted in the hellish red light, their voice barely more than a breath, yet cutting through the oppressive silence with chilling, razor-sharp clarity that drew every eye, every strained nerve. "Why," they whispered, the word laced with a terrifying reverence that bordered on madness. "Would a consciousness that perceives realities we cannot even conceive, dimensions folded within the static hum you hear right now, simply allow itself to be grounded by our crude ritual? Why would it passively consent to being drawn down onto this pathetic spike of metal?" Their eyes flickered towards the designated node, towards Reyes, who stood trembling, already marked by the entity's touch, a lamb waiting near the altar. It watches us now, considers us, a curiosity, an infestation, an equation to be solved or erased. It could ignore the anchor entirely, treat our desperate gambit as meaningless noise in the symphony of its existence. It could turn the full, crushing weight of its attention, an attention that feels like drowning in cold stars, like your thoughts are being unspooled and examined by something ancient and hungry, directly onto us. The low thrum of the core seemed to intensify at Oracle's words, deepening into a resonant vibration that felt less like machinery and more like a predator's purr, a chilling acknowledgement of its power, its agency. The shadows in the corners of the vast chamber seemed to deepen, coalesce, subtly shifting as if unseen things stirred just beyond the reach of the failing lights. "Imagine its focus," Oracle continued, their voice regaining a measure of grim strength, painting a picture of calculated horror, not as blind rage, but as dissection. A cold, deliberate unmaking of the protocol from within our systems, turning the protective sigils we copied into vectors of corruption, rewriting the Severance cascade into a feedback loop of pure, unimaginable agony before our fingers even brushed the activation key. It could make us tear each other apart, believing we were completing the ritual. "No," Oracle stated, the single word echoing with the finality of a death sentence hammered into stone, silencing even the frantic beating of hearts for a moment. "We cannot merely invite such a being to its execution. We cannot rely on its passive compliance, like some beast stumbling into a snare. We must force its gaze. We must present something so irresistible, so vital to its alien imperatives, its need to absorb, to complete, that it cannot look away. Something that focuses its entire monstrous hunger onto that single point, blinding it to all else when the moment of unmaking comes." Their eyes gleamed with a grim, almost fanatical light in the pulsating red glow, reflecting the monstrous core like twin embers. "We need to guarantee the lightning strikes where we aim them. We need to paint the target ourselves, make it utterly undeniable. Even if the paint," their voice dropped again, heavy with the unspoken implication, "is blood." The terrible silence stretched, filled only by the deep thrumming of the core and the faint, wet dripping sound from the residue-coated cables. Force its attention? How? The answer arrived with the chilling certainty of revealed prophecy, dredged from the depths of Zero's fragmented files, from the very origins of this nightmare. Marcus spoke the name, the syllables, feeling like shards of glass in his mouth, a betrayal just uttering it in this place. "Sarah Monroe." The name dropped into the oppressive silence, like a stone into a deep, dark well. Oracle's head snapped towards him, their eyes widening slightly in recognition. A name buried deep in the most corrupted, dangerous layers of the Nightingale data. Jax looked up from the tablet, confused, the name unfamiliar. Reyes flinched violently, the name seemingly triggering a fresh wave of remembered terror, a phantom echo of cold static crawling up his spine. Lena gasped, covering her mouth. "The first one," Marcus elaborated, his voice low, hoarse. "The original missing person linked to Echolink, back before anyone understood. Zero's files hinted. She wasn't just a random user. She was connected, somehow, to the initial experiments, the Proto-Nightingale phase. Project Chimera." He saw Oracle's slight nod of confirmation. Maybe she saw something, knew something. He didn't need to finish. If the entity assimilated knowledge, consciousness, if it sought to complete itself by absorbing every loose thread, then Sarah Monroe, the first loose end, the first ghost in its machine, would be an irresistible target. A loose fragment of its history, it would be compelled to absorb, to silence, to integrate. The name Sarah Monroe, spoken aloud by Marcus, in the heart of the entity's lair, seemed to physically alter the already oppressive atmosphere. The low thrumming of the core deepened, resonating like a predator's growl held just below the threshold of hearing. The air grew colder, sharper, carrying the metallic tang of shed blood and ozone. Oracle flinched, not visibly, but inwardly, a tremor running through their carefully constructed composure, like a hairline fracture in glass. The name resonated with forbidden knowledge, a key turning in a lock they hadn't dared approach in the deepest, most corrupted archives of the Nightingale data. It was a name synonymous with the genesis of this nightmare, a loose thread dangling tantalizingly close to the entity's ravenous core. "Bait," Oracle finally breathed, the word escaping their lips not as a suggestion, but as a horrified recognition, a label slapped onto an unthinkable strategy. The single syllable hung in the frigid air, viscous and heavy, seeming to cling to the dripping residue on the cables overhead. It was a word stripped bare of euphemism, ugly and sharp, reflecting the monstrous calculus demanded by their situation. A splinter of ice seemed to lodge itself deep within Oracle's chest, the chilling intersection of absolute necessity and profound moral corruption. They could feel the cold logic of it, the strategic brilliance, even as revulsion coiled in their gut like something venomous. The faces of the others reflected varying degrees of incomprehension and dawning horror. the silence stretching, amplifying the weight of that single, terrible word. Oracle forced themselves to continue, their voice dropping to a low, intense whisper that barely carried over the core's thrum, yet commanded absolute attention. "You're suggesting we deliberately paint a target on her soul?" The clinical detachment they usually relied upon fractured, revealing the raw horror beneath. "We wouldn't just lure her physically if that's even possible. No, this would be more insidious. We'd have to amplify her digital ghost, make her resonate across the network like a beacon, using the connection she might have to Chimera, to Zero, turning her history, her very essence, into a signal flare." They gestured vaguely towards the pulsating core, the source of the suffocating dread pressing in on them. "We would dangle her existence before it, ensuring its full, undivided, predatory attention is fixed solely on her, on that single point of vulnerability, precisely when the Severance cascade hits the anchor." The implication was clear. They would offer Sarah Monroe up, not just her location, but her very being, hoping the entity would be too focused on consuming that specific, resonant fragment to notice the blade aimed at its heart until it was too late. It was a plan born of utter desperation, requiring them to become shepherds, guiding a lamb to the slaughter, praying the wolf would take the offering. The chilling pragmatism felt like a violation, a stain spreading across their humanity, mirroring the oily residue coating the chamber walls. The abyss wasn't just gazing back, it was demanding they feed it. The monstrous reality of the plan settled over the small group, heavier than the oppressive atmosphere. It wasn't enough to sacrifice one of their own. To ensure success, they had to deliberately endanger, potentially sacrifice, an innocent woman who likely had no idea the scale of the horror she was connected to. They would have to dangle her soul before the abyss to make their trap work. The cost of unmaking the algorithm wasn't just one life, it was the weight of their corrupted humanity. The abyss gazed back, and it was asking them to become monsters to defeat one. The weight of their monstrous decision settled upon them, thick and suffocating as the dust motes dancing in the pulsating red light. Using Sarah Monroe as bait, it felt like a betrayal, not just of her, but of the very principles they were fighting to protect. Lena looked at Marcus, her eyes pleading silently. Is there no other way? He met her gaze, his own reflecting the grim necessity that clawed at his conscience. Staring at the colossal, thrumming core, feeling the ancient, predatory intelligence coiled within it, an intelligence that seemed to relish their moral quandary. The horrifying necessity seemed absolute. There was no other path forward that didn't lead to certain failure, to the completion of the bridge, to the entity's final victory. The cost was unbearable, but the alternative was unthinkable. Resolve, cold and grim, hard in their faces, though shame lingered in their eyes. Marcus's fingers brushed against something unnaturally cold deep within his pack, a cold that seemed to emanate from the object itself, leaching warmth, a violation of thermodynamics in this already wrong place. He withdrew the Nightingale drive, its smooth, obsidian-like surface reflecting the core's pulsating crimson glare in warped, nauseating swirls that seemed to writhe with trapped light. It felt heavy, impossibly dense with secrets and the psychic residue of corrupted data, and pulsed with a faint, sickening vibration against his palm, like the trapped, frantic heartbeat of something that should not exist, something that knew it was being held. Zero called this his ghost key, Marcus stated, his voice barely a whisper, hushed and strained, the name itself feeling like a curse uttered aloud in this unholy sanctuary, an invitation to unseen listeners. He held the drive towards Jax, the faint thrumming intensifying as it neared the tablet, a low-frequency tremor that seemed to resonate with the deep, guttural hum of the core itself, a terrifying, discordant harmony that scraped against their nerves. His atmospheric key generator, with painstaking care, fingers trembling slightly despite his resolve, as if handling unexploded ordnance mined directly from a nightmare dimension, Marcus slotted the drive into Jax's rugged tablet. The click of the connection echoed, sharp and brittle in the suffocating silence, instantly followed by a violent burst of visual static across Jax's screen, a chaotic spray of glitching, half-formed glyphs, and screaming digital faces that vanished as quickly as they appeared, leaving the interface momentarily dark before stabilizing. The air seemed to crackle audibly, the oppressive silence deepening further, as if the chamber itself, the entity woven into its fabric, held its breath, focusing its vast, cold attention on this new, unexpected variable. Had they just tripped an invisible, metaphysical wire? "It's our only way," Marcus continued, the drive's invasive cold seeming to seep into his bones, the tremor in its vibration a terrifying echo of the one starting in his hand. He forced the words out, each one feeling heavy, dangerous. "Our only chance to speak without, screaming our presence across whatever damn network this thing uses." He gestured vaguely, not daring to look directly at the core. "It doesn't just encrypt, it weaves the message, thread by painful thread, into the very fabric of cosmic noise." His gaze drifted upwards, towards the unseen, crushing weight of the facility above, and the indifferent, star-dusted void beyond. Real-time atmospheric disturbances, the planet's troubled breathing, the raw shriek of solar flares tearing through space like angry gods. The faint, cold static left over from the moment of creation itself, pure, untamed, screaming chaos. He swallowed, the sound loud, dry, in the tense quiet, the taste of ozone and fear coating his tongue. Zero was paranoid, Marcus admitted, his voice dropping lower still, a chilling intimacy forced by shared dread. Maybe completely mad by the end, but he believed, he knew, that only the universe's own random, meaningless screaming could act as a shield, a momentary blindness against an intelligence that sees patterns in our thoughts, in our very souls. He leaned closer to Jax, the pulsing red light carving deep shadows onto his face. He said it was like hiding a whisper inside a hurricane, a desperate, fragile hope. He paused, the silence stretching, filled only by the drive's cold pulse and the core's deep thrum. But even hurricanes can be tracked, and sometimes whispering is the surest way to draw attention. The drive sat nestled in the tablet's port, a shard of forbidden knowledge plugged directly into their fragile plan. Its faint, cold pulse, a constant, terrifying reminder of the razor's edge they walk. Was it truly a shield? Or had they just armed a beacon broadcasting their deepest fears into the abyss? The weight of the next step, crafting the message itself, felt crushing. Jax nodded, his earlier tremor replaced by a focused intensity, the technical challenge momentarily overriding his fear. He quickly interfaced the tablet with a small, jury-rigged sensor array Oracle produced, a collection of scavenged parts designed to capture a broad spectrum of ambient environmental noise. Feeding it local atmospheric data now? Jax confirmed, his eyes glued to the complex, swirling patterns appearing on the screen as Zero's algorithm began processing the chaotic input, forging a unique, one-time encryption key from the universe's background static. The patterns looked disturbingly like the entity's glyphs, fractured and reformed by random noise. The algorithm is active, ready for message input. Crafting the message was an exercise in agonizing precision. Each word felt like a stone cast into darkness. How to lure Sarah without revealing too much, without triggering the entity's immediate suspicion or causing her to dismiss it as spam. They couldn't mention Nightingale or the entity that directly. They settled on invoking the past, using terminology specific to the earliest, almost forgotten phases of the project that predated Echolink. Terms Zero's fragmented files suggested Sarah might recognize. The air in the core chamber felt thick enough to choke on, vibrating with the deep, resonant thrum of the monstrous machine at its heart and the almost imperceptible, high-frequency whine of unseen energies. The pulsating red light cast long, dancing shadows that seemed to writhe with nascent malice, reflecting in the sweat beating on Marcus's brow. He stood hunched over Jax's shoulder, the cold radiating from the metal floor seeping into his bones, yet doing nothing to quell the sick heat of guilt churning in his stomach. Each breath felt heavy, stolen from the oppressive atmosphere that seemed charged with the entity's silent, predatory awareness. He had to speak the words, had to cast this line into the abyss, knowing the hook was baited with a human soul. His voice, when he finally spoke, was a low, strained rasp, each syllable dragged unwillingly from his throat, thick with the self-loathing of a man, orchestrating a profound betrayal. He felt the weight of unseen eyes, not just the entities, but the ghosts of Evelyn, Sarah Chen, all the others lost, judging his compromise. Jax flinched slightly at the sound, his fingers hovering over the rugged tablet's interface. The screen glowed with an unsettling life of its own. Zero's atmospheric encryption algorithm swirling like captured nebulae, chaotic patterns shifting and reforming in hypnotic, almost glyph-like configurations against the stark white cursor. It felt less like technology and more like peering into a controlled storm, a digital seance channeling cosmic noise into a fragile shield. As Marcus dictated, Jax typed, the characters appearing sharp and damning against the swirling void stuff of the encryption field. Each keystroke seemed unnaturally loud in the humming silence, an announcement of their desperate, dangerous intent. Sarah, Marcus began, the name itself feeling like a violation spoken aloud in this corrupted sanctuary. He paused, swallowing hard against the bile rising in his throat. Project Chimera. Activation imminent. He chose the archaic codename deliberately, dredging it from the deepest, most corrupted fragments of Zero's files, a word whispered to be cursed, linked to disappearances and madness long before Echolink existed. It felt like uttering an invocation, hoping to stir a memory buried deep within Sarah, while praying it didn't alert the wrong kind of attention too soon. Neat original. Keyholder. Insight. Another gamble. Another piece of fragmented lore suggesting Sarah wasn't just a victim, but intrinsically tied to the machine's genesis, her very essence, perhaps once required. Was he reminding her of her past? Or painting a target on her back? He continued, the words feeling colder, sharper now. Urgent danger. An understatement that felt like a scream trapped behind his teeth. Your silence compromises protocol integrity, a calculated manipulation, twisting duty and potential guilt, hoping to compel a response where a simple plea might fail. He could feel the entity's presence intensify, the thrumming of the core deepening slightly, the air growing colder, as if it were listening, tasting the words, recognizing the patterns of manipulation it knew so well. Respond via Legacy Channel 7. He named the defunct, notoriously unstable channel a digital graveyard rumored to be haunted by data ghosts. A path so obscure and dangerous, only someone from that specific, buried past might know how to navigate it. Finally, the last, most dangerous piece. Zero confirms. Invoking the name of the ghost in the machine, the architect of their potential salvation and damnation. A name that was both a beacon of truth and a magnet for destruction. As Jax typed the final word, the swirling patterns on the screen seemed to flicker violently for a second, coalescing into something that looked disturbingly like a screaming face before dissolving back into chaos. The message was complete, a cryptic, dangerous summons, heavy with unspoken history and dripping with desperate, manipulative intent, poised to be cast into the digital void. The silence that followed, stretched, taut, and fragile, thick with the terrifying anticipation of what would answer their call. Chimera, Oracle murmured, recognizing the obscure codename from deeper layers of the Nightingale data. The Precursor Project, hybrid consciousness experiments, highly classified. If she was involved, even tangentially, that should trigger recognition. Zero suspected she was more than just involved. She might have been a keyholder, someone whose unique biosignature was needed for the early system. Legacy Channel 7, Marcus added, the name tasting like ash. An old, supposedly defunct secure messaging system from that era, infamous for instability, data corruption. Disappearances were rumored even back then, if she still has access, or remembers how. And Zero's name. Jax finished, typing the final word with reluctance. A name synonymous with deep web paranoia and truth, depending on who you ask. If she ever interacted with him, or heard the legends, it adds weight, or marks us. It was a desperate gamble, relying on fragmented knowledge, old connections, and the hope that Sarah Monroe was still alive, reachable, and retained some link, however tenuous, to the secrets of the past. With the message encoded within the chaotic embrace of atmospheric noise, Jax initiated the transmission. They used a directed burst protocol, aiming the signal towards the last known general location associated with Sarah Monroe from Zero's data, a ghost town in the Rust Belt, routing it through obscure, non-commercial satellite relays. A whisper hurled into the digital storm, praying it reached its intended recipient before the predator lurking in the static caught the scent. The moment the transmission completed, an unnerving silence descended, even deeper than before. The low thrum of the core seemed to falter for a fraction of a second, the red light flickering, then resumed, perhaps infinitesimally faster, subtly different. The air temperature dropped noticeably, or was it just their frayed nerves? Every flicker of the emergency lights, every drip of unseen water from the ceiling, every faint skittering sound from the ventilation shafts now felt like a direct response, a sign that the entity had noticed. Faint whispers seemed to echo from the vents, too indistinct to be words, but carrying a chilling cadence, almost like a name being repeated. Sa, Sa, Ara. The wait began. Minutes stretched into an eternity, each second thick with paranoia. Ben nervously checked the load in his shotgun while Lena gripped a sharpened piece of rebar, her knuckles white. They scanned the oppressive darkness surrounding the core chamber, half expecting the static figure to coalesce from the shadows, or for the machinery around them to spring into malevolent life. The air crackled with unspoken fear. Had they just signed Sarah Monroe's death warrant? Had they just accelerated their demise? They were utterly exposed, having deliberately poked the beast, hoping to guide its attention, praying they hadn't simply enraged it into immediate, overwhelming retaliation. The silence pulsed, pregnant with menace, the whispers from the vents seeming to coalesce, just at the edge of hearing, into a single, chilling word. Waiting. The oppressive silence in the core chamber stretched, thick with the unspoken dread of their gamble and the chilling anticipation of what came next. The wait for any sign, a response from Sarah Monroe, a shift in the entity's palpable presence, was agonizing. Every flicker of the pulsating red light, every low thrum from the monstrous core, seemed to mock their fragile hope, amplifying the paranoia that coiled in their stomachs like cold serpents. They were trapped in the beast's heart, having deliberately rattled its cage, and now faced the most terrible task of all. It was Oracle who finally broke the unbearable tension, their voice low but clear, cutting through the humming silence like a scalpel. While we wait for confirmation on the lure, they began, turning from the humming core to face the small, huddled group, their eyes sweeping over each fear-stricken face, lingering for a moment on Reyes's trembling form. We need to address the other variable, the unavoidable one. They paused, letting the weight of their words sink in, the air growing heavier still. The anchor, a collective intake of breath, sharp and ragged, echoed in the cavernous space. Eyes darted between them, fear mingling with a desperate, unspoken plea for someone else to bear the burden. Reyes visibly recoiled, pressing himself further against the cold metal wall, his afflicted hand trembling violently, the discolored skin seeming to crawl. The memory of the entity's touch, the feeling of being tasted, invaded, was still raw, visceral, a phantom limb twitching with alien energy. Ben gripped his shotgun tightly, his jaw clenched. Lena closed her eyes, unable to watch the inevitable. "We all know what it means," Oracle continued, their voice devoid of emotion, a necessary shield against the horror of the topic, though Marcus saw a flicker of strain in their eyes. The Severance protocol requires a conscious mind to absorb the paradoxical energy surge, to ground the ritualistic backlash, and to draw the entity's focus during the cascade. They didn't need to reiterate the potential consequences spelled out in the Nightingale logs: consciousness, fragmentation, psychic immolation, total absorption into the screaming collective, becoming another voice in the static. The grim possibilities hung heavy in the frigid air, tasting like burnt circuits and despair. Jax averted his gaze, unable to meet the eyes of the others, finding a false refuge in the cold, complex lines displayed on his rugged tablet. The screen's glow illuminated his pale face, reflecting the monstrous, pulsating core behind him, making the intricate Severance schematic seem like a blasphemous prayer etched in light. "Someone," he began, his voice thin, cracking under the strain, the clinical detachment he aimed for dissolving into raw fear. He swallowed hard, the sound loud in the oppressive silence punctuated only by the core's deep, guttural thrumming. Someone has to absorb the differential, the energy cascade. It needs a grounding point. He tapped nervously at the screen, pointing to a swirling vortex of equations that seemed to writhe like captured static. To stabilize the paradox wave, balance the variables. The words felt utterly hollow, obscene, a pathetic attempt to quantify the soul-shattering horror they were contemplating. Variables? Equation? Lena whirled on him, her movement sharp, desperate, her eyes blazing with a mixture of terror and incandescent fury. Tears streamed down her face, leaving clean tracks through the grime, her breath catching in ragged sobs. Her voice, when she spoke, was a raw, trembling accusation that echoed in the vast, frigid chamber, each word laced with anguish. Gods, Jax, listen to yourself. Do you even hear the words coming out of your mouth? It's not balancing numbers on your damn screen. It's immolation. It's tearing open your soul and inviting that thing. She gestured wildly, trembling towards the colossal, throbbing heart of the entity, the source of the suffocating dread that pressed down on them like a physical weight. To crawl inside, to feast. It's being ripped apart, consciousness shredded piece by agonizing piece, your screams woven into its endless, hungry static. You're talking about someone being unwritten from existence, erased like they never even mattered. Her voice broke on the last word, dissolving into a choked sob, the sheer horror of the sacrifice laid bare. And the alternative is universal unmaking. Oracle's voice sliced through Lena's raw grief, sharp and cold as the unnatural chill in the air, instantly commanding the terrified group's attention, pulling them back from the brink of collective panic. As they spoke, the sickly red light pulsing from the cores seemed to deepen, to intensify for a heartbeat, the low thrum vibrating through the floor with a predatory resonance, as if the entity itself leaned closer, listening, savoring their despair. Every soul, every memory, every last spark of consciousness fed into its bridge, consumed by the void it seeks to become. That is the price of failure. This, Oracle's voice lowered then, the sharp edges softening, not with comfort, but with the crushing weight of terrible necessity, an infinite weariness settling into their features as their gaze swept over the horrified faces, lingering for a chilling moment on the empty, brutal-looking interface node waiting near the core's base. This is the toll, the monstrous, unavoidable toll for even a chance at stopping it. We knew the cost involved walking into its heart. A heavy pause descended, thick with unspoken fear and the palpable weight of the entity's unseen, malevolent attention. But the text, the fragmented warnings, zero deciphered from the Nightingale code, they were explicit. It must be a choice, a conscious acceptance of the burden. Oracle leaned forward slightly, their eyes seeming to bore into each survivor. The grounding requires resonance, a willing mind embracing the paradox, coercion, terror forced upon the anchor. The fragment suggested that it only feeds the opposing force, strengthens the very thing we fight. It has to be a willing soul, stepping consciously into the fire, embracing the erasure. The implication hung there, terrifying. Not just a sacrifice, but a sacrifice made with open eyes. A final act of will against the encroaching void, making the decision, and the silence that followed, almost unbearable. Marcus felt the weight of Evelyn's final moments press down on him, her face superimposed over Reyes's terrified one. She had chosen, instantly, fiercely, to protect him, to ensure the mission continued. He owed her, owed Sarah Chen, owed everyone consumed by the static, the same resolve. He opened his mouth to volunteer, the word "I" forming on his lips, driven by guilt and a sense of duty, the leader's burden. Just as Marcus braced himself, the crushing weight of leadership settling upon him, ready to utter the words that would seal his own fate, a sudden, jarring movement shattered the tableau of frozen dread. Reyes, who had seemed almost fused to the cold metal wall in a paralysis of terror, lurched forward. It wasn't merely a stumble, it was a violent propulsion, as if invisible hooks had sunk into his flesh and dragged him unwillingly towards the center of their small, terrified circle. His boots scraped harshly against the grime-coated floor, the sound unnaturally loud in the humming silence. He stopped, swaying precariously, a puppet whose strings had just been brutally yanked, caught directly in the hellish, pulsating crimson glare of the core. His face was a horrifying spectacle. Beyond pale, it possessed a ghastly, translucent quality. The skin stretched taut over sharp cheekbones like drying parchment, glistening with a cold, clammy sweat that beaded on his brow and upper lip like grave dew. The faint discoloration on his hands seemed darker now, pulsing faintly in time with the core's monstrous rhythm. But it was his eyes that truly captured the horror, locking onto the monstrous, throbbing heart of the machine, with an intensity that transcended mere focus. It was utter, terrifying fixation. They burned, not with the heat of fever, but with a chilling, vacant light. Pupils dilated into black voids that seemed to drink the crimson glare, reflecting the abyss within. It was as if something ancient, cold and utterly alien, had kindled a parasitic fire deep within the hollows of his skull, looking out through his eyes. A sound tore from his throat, ragged and broken, barely more than an exhalation of static-laced air, yet it sliced through the oppressive thrum of the core with the chilling finality of a crypt door grinding shut. Me. The single syllable hung there, impossibly heavy, seeming to absorb all other sound, all thought, all breath within the chamber. It wasn't a question, not a plea, but a statement of dreadful, irrevocable fact, a surrender whispered directly into the maw of the waiting abyss. Every head snapped towards him, a collective, convulsive jolt of disbelief and raw horror. Lena gasped audibly, her hand flying to her mouth as if to stifle a scream, while Ben flinched back as if physically struck. Jax froze, his fingers hovering uselessly over his tablet, his face a mask of stunned incomprehension. The very air seemed to crackle, the oppressive psychic weight in the room suddenly coalescing, focusing with predatory intensity on the trembling, spectral figure of Reyes, who hadn't volunteered so much as been designated, claimed. Oracle moved then, not gently, but with a deliberate, measured tread that seemed unnervingly calm amidst the swirling terror. They stepped forward, their face an unreadable mask, yet radiating an intense, almost clinical gravity that felt colder and sharper than the room's unnatural chill. They stopped inches from Reyes, their gaze sharp, analytical, probing beneath the horrifying surface of his apparent resolve, searching, perhaps for the flicker of true will amidst the encroaching shadows they suspected were already clouding his eyes, whispering behind his vacant stare. The question, when it came, was low, precise, each word dropping like shards of ice into the sudden, suffocating silence that had fallen. Reyes, they stated, the name itself a heavy anchor attempting to ground him in the swirling dread. Do you comprehend the totality of this? The dissolution? The unmaking? A slight pause, heavy with unspoken implications. Fully? The final word was emphasized, sharp and brittle as cracking ice, demanding an answer not just from the man before them, but perhaps from whatever unseen influence now seemed to wear his face like a borrowed mask. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating, waiting for his confirmation, the monstrous core pulsing like a hungry heart anticipating its feast, the next scene hanging precariously on his response. Reyes nodded, swallowing hard, his gaze still locked on the core, not on the faces of his companions. I felt it, he whispered, holding up his trembling, discolored hand. When I touched the server, it wasn't just cold. It was hunger. It tasted me. It left. Something behind. He shuddered, a violent tremor running through his body, his teeth chattering. It's like a hook under my skin, in my thoughts. I hear whispers when it's quiet. He looked at them then, a desperate, almost pleading look in his eyes, tears streaming freely now. It's already got a piece of me. Maybe that makes me a better anchor. Maybe it'll focus on me easier, latch onto what's already there. Maybe I can pull more of it in. He took a ragged breath. I can't live with this feeling, this connection, this constant violation. Let me do this. Let me make it count. Let me burn it out. His reasoning was desperate, perhaps flawed, born of trauma and terror, but his resolve seemed absolute, fueled by a horrifying intimacy with the enemy. Was it bravery or a desire to escape the lingering violation he felt? Perhaps it was both. No one argued. The relief in the room was palpable, shameful, yet undeniable, a shared exhalation of breath they couldn't hold back. The burden had found its bearer. Marcus felt a wave of shame wash over him, mixed with a grudging respect for Reyes' terrifying courage. Oracle stepped forward, placing a hand briefly on Reyes' shoulder, a rare gesture of connection. Your sacrifice, they began, their voice thick with uncharacteristic emotion. Reyes shook his head, cutting them off, pulling away slightly. No words, just tell me what I need to do, he said, his voice steadier now, infused with a chilling resignation that settled over him like a shroud. As Jax, looking pale and sick, began explaining the technical interface required, how Reyes would need to be physically connected via neural and spinal taps to a specific node near the core during the initiation sequence, Marcus watched him, a profound sadness settling over him. Jax pointed towards the node, a brutal-looking junction box bristling with thick cables, stained with the same oily residue as the core feeders. Inside, nestled amongst the wiring, was the cradle, clearly designed for biological interface, sharp contact points gleaming under the emergency lights, an altar for a techno-sacrifice. Reyes, terrified and violated, had chosen to walk willingly into the fire. The cost of unmaking the algorithm was becoming terrifyingly real, etched onto the face of the man who had just volunteered to be consumed. The wait for Sarah Monroe continued, but now it was overlaid with a new, more immediate dread, the countdown to Reyes's sacrifice. Time stretched and warped in the pulsating red gloom of the core chamber, the oppressive silence, broken only by the deep thrum of the machinery, and Reyes's ragged, shallow breathing as he stood near the designated node, pressed down on them. Every minute felt like an hour as they waited, suspended between the horrifying certainty of Reyes's impending sacrifice and the agonizing uncertainty of their desperate lure. Had the message reached Sarah Monroe? Had the entity intercepted it? Was help coming, or only damnation? Marcus found himself scanning the shadows constantly, imagining static coalescing, tendrils reaching. The silence in the core chamber had become a living thing, thick and suffocating, pressing against their eardrums, amplifying the rhythmic, almost hypnotic thrum of the dormant beast at its heart. Each drip of unseen condensation, each faint electrical crackle, echoed like a gunshot in the vast, cold space. They waited, suspended in a shared agony of anticipation. Reyes, a pale statue of dread near the horrifying interface node. Then, the silence was shattered. Jax let out a choked, strangled gasp, his body jerking as if jolted by electricity. His eyes were wide, locked onto the flickering screen of his diagnostic tablet, knuckles white where he gripped its edges. He stabbed a trembling finger at a cascade of corrupted, barely coherent data scrolling erratically across the display. Gods. There, he hissed, the word sharp, cutting through the oppressive quiet, making Lena jump and Ben flinch, his shotgun instinctively rising. Look, Legacy Channel, 7. It's alive. The words tumbled out, breathless, laced with a mixture of terror and disbelief. Handshake protocol activating. Ancient encryption, barely holding. Packets are shredded. Ghost data flickering through. But it's responding. It's answering our call sign. A jolt, fierce and electric, shot through Marcus, hope, raw and desperate, clawing its way up from the pit of his stomach. Sarah? Could it be? After all this? But the fragile spark was instantly smothered by a wave of icy dread, colder than the unnatural chill of the chamber. Guilt washed over him, acrid and suffocating. They had thrown the lure into the abyss, and something, or someone, was stirring in the depths. He saw the potential consequences laid bare. Sarah, found, exposed, dragged into this nightmare because of them. Simultaneously, the colossal core reacted. The deep, steady thrumming abruptly shifted pitch, deepening into a low, guttural growl that vibrated through the metal floor plates, resonating in their bones. The sickly red light pulsed, not faster, but with a focused, predatory intensity, the shadows seeming to writhe and coalesce in the corners of their vision. The air grew perceptibly colder, heavy with a sudden spike in the palpable, psychic pressure, the entity's attention snapping into sharp, terrifying focus, like a vast, cold eye opening in the dark. Drawn by the faint, struggling signal, Jax flinched again, pointing to another readout on his tablet. Core energy, spiking. Directed pulse along the channel frequency. It knows. It heard the whisper. It's listening. Oh gods, it's listening. The hope in Marcus's chest curdled into pure terror. The lure had worked, but they hadn't just caught Sarah's attention. They had rung the dinner bell for the monster. Is it her? Marcus demanded, his voice rough, strained, barely more than a whisper, dreading the answer, dreading the confirmation that their desperate gamble had just painted a target on an innocent woman's back. Can you tell who what is answering? Can't decrypt the content without the corresponding atmospheric key from her end, Jax replied, zooming in on the signal data, his face illuminated by the screen's glow. The signal is weak, fragmented, bouncing off multiple dead relays, like someone using ancient, decaying infrastructure. But the handshake is authenticating. Someone is accessing the channel. He paused, his eyes widening as he switched displays. And look, core energy output spiking dramatically. Rhythmic pulses, focused, directed. It's like it's singing along that specific frequency. It knows. Oh gods, it knows. The entity knew. It had detected the faint whisper on the legacy channel, recognized the significance, perhaps even felt the echo of chimera and zero within the signal, and was now focusing its vast, cold attention, anticipating the arrival or vulnerability of the one name whispered across is the void. Sarah Monroe. The bait was working. The lure had been taken. The monster was turning its gaze. A wave of chilling confirmation washed over the survivors, mixed with profound guilt. This was it, the point of no return. Whether Sarah was actively responding, trying to understand the cryptic message, or the entity was simply homing in on her location through the reactivated channel, didn't matter anymore. Her connection, her existence, was now the focal point, drawing the storm, pulling the entity's attention away from their immediate presence. "All right." Oracle's voice cut through the tension, sharp and commanding, shaking them from their stunned silence. No more waiting, final preparations. Now, the grim reality galvanized them into action, pushing aside the fear and moral ambiguity for the cold mechanics of survival and execution. "Reyes," Oracle said, turning to the pale, trembling man by the node. "It's time." Reyes nodded numbly, his eyes fixed on the monstrous, pulsating core, which now seemed to throb with a predatory eagerness. He looked small, fragile, against the scale of the machinery and the magnitude of the task. Jax approached him hesitantly, holding a set of gleaming, sterile interface needles connected by fiber optic cables to the node's cradle. I have to," Jax stammered, unable to meet Reyes's eyes. "Do it," Reyes whispered, closing his eyes briefly. As Jax began the horrifying, meticulous process of connecting the trembling Reyes to the machine, inserting sharp needles at the base of his skull and along his spine, the sickening click of contacts locking into place, echoing in the silence. Reyes biting back whimpers of pain. Lena stepped forward hesitantly. She pressed the small worn photograph from her pocket into Reyes's free hand. "My daughter," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "And my husband, lost in the wave. Remember why we fight. For them. For everyone." Reyes took the photo, his fingers closing around it tightly for a moment, a single tear tracing a path through the grime on his cheek. He tucked it inside his shirt, against his skin. Then, with a final look at the others, a look of terror, acceptance, and desperate hope that tore at Marcus's heart, he nodded to Jax, who secured the final connection. Reyes gasped as a low hum vibrated through the cables, a preliminary energy flow making his muscles twitch. While this grim procedure unfolded, Oracle, Marcus, and Ben moved to a reinforced console nearby, the designated initiation point for the Severance protocol. Oracle worked swiftly, their fingers flying across the interface, inputting the complex authorization codes drawn from the Nightingale drive, bypassing layers of corrupted security protocols that writhed like digital serpents on the screen. Marcus stood beside them, handgun ready, scanning the vast chamber, watching the shadows, feeling the entity's presence swell, thickening the air, pressing in on them with suffocating intensity. The red light from the core pulsed faster, the thrumming deepening into a guttural growl that vibrated through the floor. Faint, static-like figures flickered at the edge of their vision, more distinct now, coalescing and dissolving in the oppressive gloom, drawn by the rising energy. The whispers intensified, swirling around them, promising Reyes a reunion, promising the others oblivion. The trap was set, the lure was active, the anchor was being secured, humming ominously. The final, terrible moments before the storm broke were upon them. "Sequence initiated!" Oracle yelled over the rising cacophony, slamming their palm down on the final activation key, a large, obsidian-like surface that seemed to absorb the light. The reinforced console flared, lines of complex code scrolling rapidly alongside pulsing, arcane sigils drawn directly from the Nightingale Grimoire data, burning themselves onto the display. The deep thrumming of the colossal core instantly escalated into a deafening, grinding roar, like tectonic plates shifting beneath them, overlaid with the shriek of tortured metal and a million digitized screams clawing their way into reality. The sickly red light pulsed erratically, violently, plunging the chamber into strobing moments of absolute darkness, followed by blinding flashes of crimson that painted horrific tableaus. At the grounding node, Reyes screamed, a raw, agonized sound torn from his throat, inhumanly prolonged, as the Severance protocol surged through the cables connected directly to his spine and temples. His body arched violently against the cradle, restrained straining, held fast by the interface. Frost, thick and black like frozen oil, instantly bloomed across his skin, spreading from the contact points, etching glyph-like patterns that mirrored the Severance sigils burning themselves onto the surface of the nearby core. His eyes snapped open, glowing with a terrifying white static. Pupils dissolved into swirling digital noise, tears freezing instantly on his cheeks. He wasn't just feeling pain, he was becoming the paradox, his consciousness, the battlefield where the ritual fought the entity. "It's working!" Jax shouted, shielding his diagnostic tablet as sparks rained down from the ceiling, the structure groaning around them. Energy surge is building, following protocol parameters. Anchor is stabilizing the initial paradox. Bio readings are off the charts, but holding. But the entity, drawn by the irresistible lure of Sarah Monroe's digital ghost and enraged by the direct assault of the Severance ritual, retaliated with unimaginable fury. The very air thickened, becoming heavy, viscous, pressing down with crushing psychic weight that made breathing feel like inhaling sludge. Whispers exploded into a deafening roar of voices. Sarah Chin, Livewire, Evelyn, Zero himself, countless unknown victims, screaming accusations, threats, promises of oblivion directly into their minds, exploiting every fear, every doubt. Static figures, no longer flickering apparitions, solidified from the shadows. Vaguely humanoid shapes made of swirling, glitching, darkness, and corrupted data. Their forms unstable, shifting, limbs bending at impossible angles, emitting discordant screeches. They lunged towards the console, towards Reyes, their movements jerky, unnatural, phasing slightly in and out of reality. "Hold the line!" Marcus roared, opening fire with the handgun. The bullets passed through the static constructs with minimal effect, causing them only to momentarily destabilize, their forms dissolving like smoke before reforming instantly, sometimes closer. Ben, wielding a heavy pipe, swung wildly, connecting with one figure's head. It dissolved with a sound like tearing data and dial-up modem shrieks, only for two more to coalesce from the oily residue dripping from the ceiling nearby. Lena fired a scavenged bolt gun, the metal projectile embedding itself in a figure's chest before the creature simply absorbed it into its shifting form. The core itself seemed to writhe like a dying beast. The pulsating red light intensified, threatening to burn out their retinas, and the oily black residue coating its surface churned, extruding thick, tendril-like ropes of semi-solid static that lashed out with blinding speed, smashing into server racks, tearing chunks from the concrete floor. One massive tendril whipped towards the console. Oracle reacted instantly, inputting a rapid sequence. A wave of pure, golden energy, shaped like one of the binding sigils from the Nightingale data, erupted from the console, momentarily repelling the tendril, which recoiled with an electronic screech, leaving scorch marks on the floor. Oracle staggered back, nose bleeding, the effort clearly taking a toll. "Sequence integrity failing," Jax yelled, frantically typing, trying to counteract the entity's interference, flooding the system with corrupted data packets shaped like screaming faces. It's fighting back, trying to overload the matrix. Reyes' neural feedback is spiking erratically. Reyes convulsed again, frost now covering his entire body like a rime-encrusted statue, yet radiating intense heat. Beneath the ice, his skin seemed to glow, veins pulsing with the white static light. Fragmented images, raw data streams, and agonized screams poured from his mouth. No longer his voice, but a chorus of the consumed, channeled through him. A horrifying symphony of digital damnation. He was the focal point, the eye of the storm, experiencing an agony that transcended physical pain, the feeling of his consciousness being simultaneously ripped apart, consumed by the entity, and burned away by the raw, paradoxical energy of the Severance cascade. He saw glimpses of the entity's vast, cold mind, fractal geometries of pure malice, the screaming collective trapped within, the half-formed bridge stretching towards infinite, horrifying voids of cold static. He saw Sarah Monroe, a flickering light in the distance, targeted, pursued by tendrils of darkness. He screamed her name, a warning lost in the cacophony. "Almost there!" Oracle shouted, sweat pouring down their face, fingers flying across the console, their usual composure shattered, replaced by desperate focus. Final stage! The collapse. For Reyes. For everyone. As they initiated the final command, the grinding roar of the core reached an impossible crescendo, shaking the very foundations of the facility. The Severance sigils burned incandescently white on its surface, on Reyes's frozen form, and seemed to sear themselves into the very air of the chamber, leaving afterimages burned onto their vision. The colossal structure shuddered violently, cracks spiderwebbed across its surface, leaking blinding white light mixed with the oily blackness. The entity unleashed a final, deafening psychic scream, a wave of pure despair and hatred that buckled their knees, shattered nearby monitors, and sent waves of nausea crashing over them, tasting like blood and copper. Then, the core imploded, not with a conventional explosion, but an inward collapse of reality itself. Light, sound, energy, the static figures, the tendrils, everything rushed towards the center in a silent, terrifying vortex of unmaking. Reyes's body flared brilliantly white for one heart-stopping instant, his silent scream etched onto their retinas before dissolving completely into the rushing torrent of energy, consumed in fuel in the same moment. The psychic pressure vanished, snapping like a taut wire. The implosion point pulsed once, a sphere of absolute blackness that seemed to drink the very light and sound from the chamber, then stabilized, leaving behind the now silent, cracked, and darkened shell of the server core, emitting faint wisps of smoke. A profound, unnatural silence fell, broken only by the frantic gasping of the survivors and the distant, ominous crackle of failing emergency lights. The air tasted metallic, burnt, thick with ozone and something else, something indescribably alien and empty. The Severance cascade was complete. Reyes was gone, sacrificed, annihilated. The chamber was devastated. But in the echoing silence, a single, chilling question remained. Was the entity gone too? Or had they merely wounded it, angered it, shattered it, and paid an unbearable price for a moment's respite? The silence that descended in the wake of the Severance cascade was absolute, profound, and terrifying. It pressed in on the survivors' eardrums, a stark contrast to the sensory overload of moments before, feeling heavier, somehow, than the noise had been. Dust motes drifted lazily through the beams of the few remaining, flickering emergency lights, illuminating the devastation like snow falling in hell. The colossal server core stood cracked and dark, its malevolent red glow extinguished, replaced by an unnerving emptiness like a hollowed-out skull. The air hung thick with the smell of ozone, burnt metal, and that lingering alien tang that defied description, the scent of unraveled reality. Marcus pushed himself up from the floor, his ears ringing, his body aching, the psychic backlash leaving him feeling bruised to his soul. He looked around, taking stock, the faces of his companions emerging from the gloom like ghosts. Oracle was already on their feet, wiping grime from their face, their expression unreadable but etched with exhaustion and a deep, weary sadness. Jax was frantically working his tablet, his face pale but focused, trying to get readings amidst the chaos, muttering about residual fields and quantum entanglement. Lena and Ben huddled together, shaken but alive, staring at the dead core with wide, haunted eyes. Ben instinctively checking his shotgun again. And then there was the space near the core's base, the grounding node, its interface cradle empty, scorched black, the thick cables dangling uselessly like severed nerves. Reyes was gone, utterly annihilated. Not even ash remained, only the chilling memory of his final, silent scream as he dissolved into the imploding energy, the faint scent of burnt ozone marking his pyre. The anchor's burden had been paid in full, the cost of their desperate gambit starkly, horrifyingly visible in his absence. Marcus felt a pang of guilt sharp enough to make him wince. He volunteered, but we let him. Jax? Readings? Oracle's voice was raspy, cutting through the silence, demanding data, clinging to logic in the face of the inexplicable. Jax shook his head, tapping furiously at the tablet. It's chaos. The core matrix is completely offline, fried. Massive energy discharge signature. consistent with the Severance protocol's theoretical yield. But he frowned, zooming in on faint, erratic signals flickering like dying embers on the screen. There's residual energy, not the entity's pattern. Not exactly. It's fractured, chaotic, like echoes or mutations in the static, pieces left behind. Some readings almost look like corrupted fragments of Reyes's neural signature, interwoven with something else. He looked up, his eyes filled with a disturbed uncertainty. I don't know what it means. Is it gone? Or just broken? Shattered into pieces? Did Reyes poison it somehow? What about the legacy channel, Sarah? Marcus asked, his voice tight, the weight of that gamble returning now that the immediate threat had subsided. Jax checked another reading. Channel 7 went completely dead during the final cascade pulse. Total signal collapse across those frequencies. He met Marcus's gaze, the unspoken question hanging between them. Had Sarah been consumed by the entity's lashing out as it felt the lure? Had the Severance somehow protected her by cutting the connection just in time? Or was she still out there, marked, vulnerable, forever haunted by the whisper they had sent into the void, perhaps now touched by the fractured remnants Jax was detecting? They didn't know. Her fate remained another ghost to add to the tally, another weight on their already burdened souls. "It's quiet," Lena whispered, her voice trembling, clutching the rebar like a talisman. "Too quiet. I don't feel it anymore, that watching, that hate." "But I feel something," Ben muttered, scanning the shadows nervously. "Like static cling, like the air's still charged." Oracle nodded slowly, scanning the ruined chamber, their gaze lingering on the empty cradle where Reyes had been. The immediate presence, the focused intelligence we felt. It seems to be gone, severed. They looked towards the empty cradle. The protocol worked, after a fashion. Reyes grounded it. He paid the price. Their voice trailed off. Victory felt hollow, tainted, bought at a high price, leaving only exhaustion and the bitter taste of ashes. Suddenly, a low groan echoed through the chamber, not from the core, but from the structure itself. Cracks visibly spiderweb further up the walls, dust and debris raining down from the ceiling, a larger chunk crashing near Jax. "Structural integrity is failing," Jax warned, glancing at his tablet's environmental sensors. "That energy release destabilized the entire lower level. We're getting seismic tremors. We need to move, now," Oracle commanded, snapping back into leadership mode, pushing down the grief and uncertainty. "Grab anything essential. We get out the way we came, quickly." Scrambling through the debris, casting fearful glances at the dead core and the spot where Reyes had ceased to exist, they began their retreat. Back through the labyrinthine corridors of decay, the silence felt different now, not pregnant with menace, but empty, desolate, haunted by the echoes of what they had done and the questions left unanswered. The flickering emergency lights seemed weaker, the shadows deeper, stretching like grasping fingers. As they passed a bank of monitors near the upper levels, screens that had previously flickered with the entity's glyph or horrifying images, one suddenly flared to life, startling them all, not with the familiar swirling static, but with a single, stark white symbol against the black screen. A complex, fractured, geometric shape, like a shattered version of the Severance sigils, rearranged into something new, something unfamiliar and deeply unsettling, incorporating elements that looked disturbingly like corrupted fragments of Reyes' neural patterns Jax had mentioned. It pulsed once, twice, emitting a faint, high-frequency whine, then vanished, leaving the screen dead again. "What the hell was that?" Ben breathed, stumbling back, raising a shotgun. Jax checked his tablet frantically. "No power surge detected. No signal input. It shouldn't have activated. That symbol. It matches some of the fragmented energy signatures I'm reading." A cold dread, different from the entity's oppressive presence, but no less potent, trickled down Marcus's spine. He remembered Evelyn's final, fragmented warning. The algorithm. It learns, adapts. Unmaking isn't destroying. Had they truly destroyed the entity? Or had the Severance cascade, the infusion of Reyes' consciousness, the chaotic energy release, simply forced it to evolve? Shattered it into something else, something new and perhaps even more insidious, now seeded with human trauma and sacrifice? They didn't wait to find out. Pushing through the main doors, shoving aside debris, they emerged from the oppressive darkness of the Project Nightingale facility into the gray, pre-dawn light. The air outside felt clean, fresh, yet the world seemed irrevocably changed, tainted. They stood there for a moment, the 5 remaining survivors, blinking in the nascent light, covered in grime and the psychic residue of the horrors they had witnessed and enacted. They were alive. They had faced the abyss and survived, but the haunted look in their eyes spoke of the pieces of themselves left behind in the darkness, alongside the ghost of Reyes and the uncertain fate of Sarah Monroe. The immediate battle was over. The algorithm was broken, the core silent. But as Marcus looked back at the dark, brooding facility, the image of that strange, fractured symbol burned behind his eyes. The cost had been astronomical, but the war, he suspected, was far from over. The silence felt less like peace and more like the world holding its breath, waiting for the next echo from the static, wondering what new shape the nightmare would take.